The night had started like any other inside the large research center that sat quietly on the edge of the city. Most people were asleep across the world, but inside the main control hall, the lights were bright, screens were glowing, and a group of tired scientists were staring at repeating signals that didn't make any sense. At first, nobody paid much attention. Strange signals from space were not new. Most of the time, they turned out to be noise from broken satellites or small stars sending out random pulses. But tonight, something felt different. The signals weren't random. They had a pattern. And every few minutes, the pattern repeated with almost perfect timing. One of the analysts leaned forward, rubbing his eyes as if that would help him understand what he was seeing. He replayed the last set of signals and slowed them down. The pulses were short, then long, then short again. There was a rhythm, almost like someone knocking on a door, again and again, trying to get attention. He called out to his team quietly, but there was a tremble in his voice that made everyone else feel uneasy. They gathered around the screen and watched the rhythm repeat. Nobody said it out loud, but they all felt it. This wasn't an accident. It looked like someone, somewhere far away, was trying to talk Dot by the next morning. The research center had already contacted major space agencies across the world. Even before sunrise, the top members of the Global Council were on a secured video call, listening to the scientists explain everything. The signals came from a region of space that had no known planets, no stars bright enough to send strong bursts, and no old satellites that could cause interference. The council kept quiet as the scientists spoke, their faces becoming more serious with each sentence. Finally, one of the council members asked the question everyone else was afraid to say out loud. "Are we dealing with someone?" The room fell silent. Nobody wanted to jump to conclusions. But the repeating pattern, the timing, the organized structure, it all pointed in one direction. Something intelligent might be behind it. Yet, nobody wanted to believe that so quickly. Hours later, after more analysis, the council gathered again, this time in person, inside a large underground meeting chamber. Only a handful of people knew what was happening. The world outside continued its usual rhythm. People went to work, children went to school, and nobody knew that above them an important decision was being made. Inside the chamber, a long table stretched across the room. Screens lined the walls, each showing different graphs, wave patterns, and translations. The air felt heavy, like everybody was breathing slower without even noticing. A senior scientist, who was known for staying calm in situations where most people fell apart, stood at the front. Her voice was steady as she explained that the signals were more than just patterns. After running them through several decoding systems, parts of the message looked intentional. They repeated key shapes in a way that suggested meaning, not noise. The council listened closely, leaning forward, their eyes locked on the screens. The scientist continued, explaining that the message pointed to something strange. The sender seemed to believe Earth was dangerous. The scientist said this slowly, carefully, because even saying the words out loud felt unreal. The room erupted into whispers, confusion, and disbelief. How could a peaceful planet be seen as a dangerous force? Earth had problems, yes. Wars, mistrust, pollution. But compared to the possibilities of the universe, Earth was small, fragile, barely capable of exploring its own neighborhood in space. One council member shook his head in disbelief. Why would they think we're dangerous? We can't even reach another solar system. We're still learning to survive our own mistakes. Another added, unless they see something we don't, something about our technology or signals. The scientist waited for everyone to settle down before she continued. She explained that the sender might be watching Earth for a long time, maybe even longer than humans have had advanced technology. If that was true, then everything Earth sent out, every satellite launch, every rocket test, every radio wave could be misunderstood. To a far more advanced civilization, Earth might look like a young planet trying to grow too fast. Still, nobody wanted to believe that Earth could be seen as a threat. The idea felt too big, too overwhelming. Some council members argued that this could all be a misunderstanding. Others, however, were afraid that the signals were a warning, not a conversation. The scientist clicked to another screen, showing a clearer breakdown of the message. One line stood out, a fit repeating part that looked like a translation of the phrase, "dangerous force." The moment the council read it, a cold silence filled the room. Even though the scientist warned them not to jump to conclusions, it was impossible not to imagine the worst. After a few moments, a younger analyst entered the room with new information. He looked nervous, holding a tablet tightly in both hands. He explained that the signals had changed slightly in the last hour. The pattern was becoming sharper, stronger, and more urgent. It looked like the sender was trying harder to get Earth's attention. The council exchanged worried glances. What if this wasn't a warning? What if it was an attempt to stop something they believed Earth was about to do? The scientist repeated again that nothing suggested an attack. Earth had no such power. But misunderstandings between different species, especially ones that had never communicated before, could easily spiral out of control. Inside that chamber, everyone felt the same thing, a mix of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. The idea that someone beyond Earth was watching them felt unreal, yet the evidence was right in front of them. The council needed to decide how to respond. Should they send a message back? Should they stay silent and hope the signals stop? Or should they wait until the message becomes clearer? Each option had risks. Responding could confirm Earth's position and intentions. Staying silent might show disrespect or fear. Waiting too long could make the sender impatient. For the first time in history, the council didn't have any guidebook, no expert from the past to follow. They were walking into unknown territory. The scientist reminded everyone to stay calm. Human history had seen many moments where confusion created conflict. But there were also moments where patience and understanding saved countless lives. This might be another one of those moments. She asked the council to avoid panic and focus on understanding the message fully. If Earth responded out of fear, things could go wrong. If Earth responded with clarity and peace, there might be a chance to avoid disaster. Her voice carried enough confidence to make the room quiet again. People took slow breaths, gathering their thoughts. The council chairperson stood up and looked at everyone, one by one. This wasn't just about politics or nations anymore. This was about the entire world, every life on Earth. The chairperson asked the scientist one final question. Is there a chance this is all a mistake? The scientist nodded. Yes, a big chance. Misunderstandings happen even between humans. Imagine the misunderstandings between species that have never met. For a moment, the tension in the room softened. People wanted to believe it was a but the truth was still heavy. The message was real. And someone out there believed Earth was something at WASN single quotes T. The meeting stretched late into the night. No decisions were made yet. Everyone left the room knowing they would return the next day with the same weight on their shoulders. Outside, the world kept turning, unaware that a distant civilization might be watching, judging, or misunderstanding everything humans had done. Inside the minds of those council members, one thought kept returning over and over. If this misunderstanding wasn't fixed soon, it could change Earth's future forever. The next morning, the tension from the council chamber had not left anyone's mind. People returned to their daily routines, but in the research centers and observation stations around the world, the quiet hum of machines had a new sense of urgency. The signals from space had not stopped. In fact, they seemed stronger, sharper, and closer. Analysts monitored every pulse and tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Some of the bursts of energy hit the upper atmosphere, creating faint glows that telescopes picked up. Scientists knew these bursts were harmless, but nobody ignored them. They were too unusual, too precise, too intentional. Inside one of the satellite monitoring stations, a young technician stared at her screen in disbelief. The bursts were forming patterns in the atmosphere, almost like invisible lines connecting points across the globe. She tapped the keyboard repeatedly, adjusting the satellites to get a better reading. Each time she did, the pattern became clearer, almost as if someone was sending a visual message in addition to the radio pulses. Her heart raced. Could it really be a warning? Back in the council chamber, the senior scientist who had stayed calm the day before explained her latest findings. She suggested that these bursts were not attacks, but scans. The advanced civilization might be analyzing Earth, trying to see what humans were capable of. She emphasized that these scans were careful, deliberate, and structured, not random explosions of energy. The bursts might look aggressive, but they were probably just their way of observing. The council, however, was not fully reassured. Some members argued that even if the bursts were just scans, their appearance in the atmosphere could still cause panic if the public noticed. Governments across several countries had already begun quiet internal preparations, making plans to explain the unusual lights if civilians reported them. No one wanted mass panic, but the question of whether to respond lingered in every mind. Meanwhile, a group of researchers worked night and day to decode the signals further. Each new message seemed more complex than the last. Patterns appeared and disappeared. Symbols shifted in ways that suggested meaning, not randomness. One of the analysts, after staring at the signals for hours, suddenly froze. A part of the message, after careful translation, implied that Earth might be preparing some kind of attack. The words were not aggressive, but they were cautious, almost fearful. The analyst immediately reported this to the council. The council's reactions were mixed. Some members laughed nervously, thinking it must be a mistake. Earth is hardly a threat, one said. We are still learning how to control our own weapons and satellites. Others frowned, worried. They realized that from a distance, humans' technology and scientific progress could look threatening. Rocket launches, nuclear testing, and even communication satellites might appear as military preparation. The senior scientist stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. She explained that the civilizations sending the signals might have been attacked before by another species, and they were projecting that fear onto Earth. This was not unusual. Even humans often misjudge intentions based on limited information. From their perspective, a planet that was rapidly advancing could seem dangerous. They might be trying to protect themselves, assuming the worst. The council debated long and hard. Should they respond to the signals directly? Should they send a peaceful message, trying to explain Earth's intentions? Or should they stay silent, hoping the misunderstanding would resolve itself? Each option seemed risky. Responding could make humans' location and capabilities more visible. Staying silent could make the aliens more suspicious. Waiting too long could escalate tension, as the pulses seemed to become more urgent with time. The scientists suggested a middle path. They could prepare a calm and neutral message explaining Earth's peaceful nature, but wait for the right moment to send it. She emphasized that the message needed to be clear, honest, and simple. Any hint of exaggeration or defensiveness could be misinterpreted as aggression. Her words were met with nods and quiet murmurs. Everyone understood that this was a delicate balance. Outside the chambers, ordinary life went on, unaware of the tense preparations happening behind the scenes. People walked to work, children played in parks, and airplanes flew overhead. But above the Earth, the bursts of energy continued, silent to everyone except the scientists who were watching. Some bursts reflected sunlight, creating faint streaks, visible through telescopes. They were subtle, almost beautiful, but carried a warning that no one in the world could fully understand yet. Late in the afternoon, a new development startled the team. The satellites picked up objects moving in a strange formation. They were not meteors, not comets, and not anything the researchers recognized. The objects seemed large, dark, and carefully controlled, moving slowly toward Earth. Everyone in. The room froze. The scientist immediately warned the council that these objects might be connected to the signals. They might be observation vessels, not warships, but their presence could be misinterpreted as an attack. The council convened again, this time with heightened urgency. Every member spoke, some more worried than others. One pointed out that Earth's defenses were limited and untested against anything extraterrestrial. Another argued that showing fear or rushing to respond could provoke unnecessary tension. The debate was heated, but underneath the words was a shared understanding. This was uncharted territory. No human being had ever experienced this before. Senior scientist once again reminded everyone to focus on facts and evidence. She explained that the object's trajectories were precise, calculated, and non-aggressive. They were not firing weapons or making any sudden movements. The energy bursts seemed to be part of the same system, part of a careful observation network. If humans reacted too quickly, it could be seen as a hostile gesture. A younger analyst suggested creating a model of the alien civilization's perspective. Using the patterns from the signals, the intensity of the energy bursts, and their previous observations of other planets in the galaxy, the team tried to predict what the civilization might think about Earth. It was slow, painstaking work. Every new variable could change the predictions dramatically. But slowly, a picture emerged. The aliens were cautious, afraid, and trying to assess whether Earth's growth was dangerous. The council understood that misunderstanding was the main risk. The scientists said, "They are not attacking. They are scared, and we must respond in a way that shows them they have nothing to fear. If we do that correctly, we could avoid a crisis before it even begins." The words felt hopeful, but the room remained tense. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Meanwhile, the young technician who had first noticed the atmospheric patterns worked with a small team to refine the scans. They discovered that each burst of energy was focused, almost like a flashlight, sweeping across the planet. Some scans aligned with large human cities, others with research centers, and some with launch facilities. It became clear that the civilization was trying to understand humans in a very detailed way. They were careful, precise, and patient, but also clearly anxious. Late at night, after hours of analysis, the council finally agreed on a plan. They would create a simple message explaining Earth's intentions, emphasizing peace, curiosity, and the limits of human technology. It would be factual, without exaggeration, and it would avoid anything that could be interpreted as a threat. The message had to be perfect, and the council appointed a small team to draft it carefully. Even as the message was being drafted, the objects in space slowly drew closer. The bursts of energy continued, brighter than before, scanning the planet in more complex ways. The tension in the control rooms was nearly unbearable. Every beep of the computer, every flicker on the screen, made the scientists' hearts race. Scientists reminded everyone that panic would not help. Humans had always faced challenges they did not fully understand, and calm, measured responses had always been the key to survival. This was no different. She reminded the team that their task was not to fight, not to hide, but to communicate clearly and honestly. By the end of the day, the message draft was nearly complete. It described Earth's technology, its peaceful intentions, and the limits of human capability. It explained the bursts of energy humans had created themselves through rocket launches and satellite activity, hoping to clarify that humans had no plan to attack anyone. It was careful, respectful, and as clear as anyone could make it. The council met one last time before sending it. Everyone in the room understood that this was a historic moment, not just for science or politics, but for every human being on Earth. They were about to reach across the stars, to speak to a civilization that had never known them, and hope that understanding could replace fear. As the council approved the message, the scientist took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Let's hope they hear us the way we mean to be heard." Outside the windows, the sun had already set, but the bursts of energy from above continued their silent pattern, a reminder that somewhere far away, someone was watching, waiting, and deciding how to respond. For the first time, the human race felt both small and enormous. Small, because the universe was vast and full of mysteries beyond comprehension. Enormous, because every decision now mattered, not just for a city, a country, or even a continent, but for TH. The next morning, the world outside went on as usual, but inside the control centers and council chambers, nothing felt normal. The signals from space had not stopped. They were stronger, more complex, and more urgent. The observation vessels, which were now clearly visible on radar, moved slowly and deliberately closer to Earth. Their movements were precise, and yet they carried a quiet weight that made everyone watching uneasy. Every analyst, every scientist, and every council member felt the same thing. Something extraordinary was happening, and humanity had never faced anything like this before. The council met again in their secure chamber. This time, the tension in the room was heavier than ever. Some members were anxious, pacing back and forth, while others stared at the screen silently, trying to read meaning into the waves of energy hitting Earth's atmosphere. The senior scientist reminded everyone to stay calm, but even her voice carried the strain of uncertainty. It was one thing to analyze signals from afar, another to see enormous objects moving deliberately toward the planet you lived on. As the council discussed the next steps, a young analyst who had been working overnight made a startling discovery. He pointed to a series of repeated signals that formed a countdown pattern. The symbols appeared in precise sequences, marking time in a way that suggested urgency. The council leaned closer, their faces tense. Was this a warning? A measurement? Or something else entirely? Nobody could say for sure. The scientist reminded everyone that assuming aggression could be dangerous. These advanced beings could have a completely different way of interpreting time, priority, or even risk. The countdown might not be an attack. It might simply be a timeline for observation, for inspection, or even for communication. The debate grew louder. One council member argued that they needed to prepare defenses, just in case. Another countered that preparing defenses could send the wrong message, revealing fear or hostility. Every option seemed to carry risk. For the first time, humans had to consider the possibility of interacting with a civilization far beyond their own understanding, one whose perception of Earth might be shaped by incomplete information or past experiences the humans could not. Meanwhile, analysts discovered something else. The signals contained subtle references to humans' past activities, space exploration, rocket launches, and satellite networks. The extraterrestrial observers seemed to be aware of humanity's technological growth and were interpreting it in a way that made them cautious. One younger analyst suggested that the civilization had likely experienced threats from other intelligent beings before and were projecting that fear onto Earth. The council realized that misinterpretation was the core issue. The aliens were not necessarily hostile, but they were worried, and worry from an advanced civilization could have consequences humans could not predict. While the council debated, The observation vessels moved closer to the outer edges of Earth's orbit. Telescopes showed massive, silent structures drifting with grace, scanning the planet below. Their surfaces were dark, smooth, and reflective, giving nothing away. Scientists at the research centers were captivated by their precision. Each movement, each rotation, each energy burst from these vessels was methodical. Even without weapons, their presence alone inspired awe and anxiety. The senior scientist reminded everyone that the aliens' caution was a chance for humans to act wisely. A careful, measured response could prevent misunderstandings from escalating. She suggested that the team focus on clarifying Earth's intentions through careful communication. The council agreed, though uneasily. The message drafted the day before now needed careful review. Every word had to be scrutinized to ensure there was no possibility of misinterpretation. Even the smallest phrase could be read differently by a civilization with an entirely different perspective on technology, conflict, and peace. Late in the afternoon, a breakthrough occurred. Using advanced translation algorithms, one of the analysts discovered clues suggesting that the civilization feared preemptive attacks. They had been attacked before by other intelligent species and were hypersensitive to any signs of technological development that might indicate aggression. Every human rocket, satellite, and test launch had likely been recorded and analyzed, giving them a false impression that Earth was preparing for something dangerous. The revelation shocked the council. It explained why the bursts of energy had appeared so deliberately focused and why the observation vessels seemed so cautious yet persistent. This was not a declaration of war. It was fear, amplified by misunderstanding. The room felt heavy with the weight of realization. The mistake of misinterpretation could have led to unnecessary tension, and perhaps worse, if humans acted hastily. The council members understood the importance of patience and clarity more than ever. The analyst who discovered this sat quietly, eyes glued to the screen. He felt both relief and anxiety. Relief that this was not a direct threat, and anxiety because the world above them was still being closely monitored. Every decision humans made could still influence the perception of this advanced civilization. The scientist reminded everyone that this was an unprecedented opportunity, the chance to establish communication and understanding rather than conflict. From the very beginning, the council decided to update their message. The new version would explain humanity's peaceful intentions, the limits of their technology, and the care taken in all space activities. It would include the simple fact that humans were still learning, still growing, and that there was no plan to harm anyone. They also agreed to include a timeline of humanity's achievements in exploration, science, and communication to give context and transparency. This wasn't about pride, it was about trust, showing the civilization that humans were open, honest, and cautious might prevent misunderstandings from escalating further. While the council worked, the observation vessels continued their slow journey around Earth. Each pass provided new data, and the energy bursts that followed their path became more complex, almost like a pattern of questions waiting for answers. Analysts began comparing the bursts to patterns in human communication, trying to match rhythms to possible meanings. It was painstaking work, and for many, the nights grew long and exhausting. The weight of responsibility felt heavier with each passing hour. By evening, another unexpected discovery changed everything again. A new set of signals appeared, much clearer and more detailed than before. They contained subtle instructions, almost like directions or guidelines for interaction. The council realized that the civilization was trying to guide humans, perhaps testing how they would respond. There was a faint sense of hope in the room. The advanced beings were not attacking. They were observing, canalizing, and perhaps even attempting to teach humans a lesson in patience and careful communication. Despite the hopeful signs, The council remained cautious. They knew that any wrong step could still provoke a misinterpretation. They discussed at length how to proceed, how to time the transmission of the message, and how to ensure it was as clear as possible. They debated whether to send it immediately, or wait for further signals that might provide additional clarity. The senior scientist reminded them that time could be an ally if used wisely, but it could also increase tension if delays were interpreted as hesitation or fear. Outside the council chamber, life continued, oblivious to the silent tension above. People walked home, ate dinner, and watched the stars at night, unaware that massive objects and mysterious energy patterns were circling their planet. The contrast between normal human life and the extraordinary situation unfolding above was striking. It reminded the council that the stakes were not abstract, they were personal. Every human on Earth could be affected by how this situation played out. Finally, after long hours of review and discussion, the council agreed on the final draft of the message. It was simple, clear, and honest. It explained Earth's current technological capabilities, emphasized peaceful intentions, clarified any actions that could have been misinterpreted, and expressed a desire for understanding. Every sentence had been checked for ambiguity. Every word had been weighed for its potential interpretation by beings with intelligence far beyond human understanding. Once approved, the message was prepared for transmission. Satellites capable of sending signals beyond the solar system were calibrated carefully. Analysts monitored the broadcast to ensure that the message would reach its destination intact. Even small errors in timing, signal strength, or formatting could lead to miscommunication. Everyone involved knew the importance of precision. As the transmission began, the senior scientist and the council members watched silently. Outside, the observation vessels continued their slow orbit, unaware of how humans were responding. The energy bursts above the planet continued their quiet rhythm, almost like the universe itself was holding its breath. The scientist whispered to herself, "Let's hope they understand the way we mean to be understood." For the first time since the signals had arrived, there was a quiet sense of cautious optimism in the room. The human race had taken its first step toward communicating with an intelligent civilization beyond the stars. The outcome was still uncertain, but for the moment, humans had chosen patience, honesty, and clarity over fear and reaction. The world below continued to. The next day brought a tense quiet across the council chambers and the research centers around the world. After the message had been sent, everyone waited with bated breath. There was no immediate response from the observation vessels, no sudden movements, no bursts of energy signaling approval or anger. The waiting was almost unbearable. Every beep from a computer, every flicker of a satellite image, felt loaded with meaning. Analysts and scientists worked tirelessly, monitoring the signals, checking the transmission, and reviewing data for any sign of feedback. The senior scientist reminded the council that patience was crucial. Misunderstanding and fear had brought humanity to the edge in past conflicts, both small and large. The same could happen now if anyone acted rashly. She urged them to focus on the evidence. The vessels had moved slowly, there had been no aggressive energy bursts, and the signals from the past hours were neutral. This suggested that the civilization was still observing, still analyzing, and perhaps even waiting for more proof of humanity's peaceful intentions. Meanwhile, small groups of researchers studied the signals in depth. They noticed subtle changes. Some of the energy bursts became softer, less urgent, and followed more intricate patterns. It was as if the observers were adjusting their scans, testing Earth in new ways, or perhaps responding to the clarity of the message that had been sent. The analysts hypothesized that the civilization was verifying the honesty of Earth's communication. They might have expected exaggeration or hidden threats, but the careful, factual approach of the message seemed to have calmed them slightly. The Council convened again, this time in a larger, secure chamber. Members of various nations were present, their faces tense with anticipation. The senior scientist explained that the changes in the signals indicated that the civilization was still cautious, but no longer immediately fearful. They were analyzing the data, likely trying to verify the planet's capabilities and intentions. The Council realized that this was a critical moment. Every decision, every action, and every delay could affect how Earth was perceived. One analyst presented a theory that explained the countdown patterns from the previous day. He suggested that the civilization might have a long history of dealing with intelligent species and had created structured observation protocols. These protocols included timelines, cross-checks, and verification methods to ensure that they could accurately assess potential threats before taking any action. From their perspective, Earth's rapid technological progress could have been interpreted as preparation for conflict. Even if no hostile intent existed, the Council understood the implications. They were not dealing with aggression. They were dealing with misunderstanding. The civilization's caution was rooted in past experiences, not malice. Still, this didn't make the situation any less critical. A mistake, a misread signal, or a poorly worded human response could escalate the tension unnecessarily. The stakes were not just national, they were planetary. As the hours passed, the observation vessels drew closer, their presence more visible. Through telescopes and radar, analysts described them as massive, smooth, and deliberate in movement. Even without weapons or obvious threat, their size and precision were imposing. Scientists compared the vessel's movements to those of careful researchers examining a fragile specimen, methodical, slow, and exacting. Every pass over Earth provided new data, new scans, and new challenges in interpretation. The Council decided it was time to provide additional clarification to the observers. A second message was drafted, building on the first. This time, it included detailed explanations of human activity that could have been misunderstood. Rocket launches, satellite deployments, and energy tests were described in plain, factual terms. The message emphasized Earth's peaceful intentions and the limited capability of humanity's technology. Transparency was key. The goal was to reduce fear, clarify purpose, and avoid any appearance of hidden motives. While the message was being finalized, another observation revealed something unexpected. One of the vessels projected a subtle energy wave toward Earth's atmosphere. It was not aggressive, but it seemed deliberate. Scientists speculated that this could be a form of response, a verification step, or even a method of communication. The energy wave interacted with Earth's magnetic field in a way that created faint visual auroras in certain regions. It was subtle enough that most people would not notice, yet it carried enormous significance for those who understood. The Council watched these developments carefully. They realized that this civilization was trying to establish rules for interaction, much like humans would do when introducing themselves to a new species on Earth. Patience, careful observation, and clear communication were the only ways forward. Any aggressive or defensive action on Earth could be misinterpreted as hostility. Undoing the progress made by the first message, the senior scientist emphasized the importance of remaining calm and systematic. Humans were fortunate that this civilization had not reacted aggressively. Their caution, while intimidating, offered a window of opportunity to demonstrate honesty and peaceful intent. The Council decided to maintain a continuous monitoring system, ensuring that all signals and patterns were recorded and analyzed in real-time. As the day turned into night, the Council noticed that the energy bursts from the observation vessels had started to form intricate patterns over specific regions of Earth. Analysts believed these patterns were tests, possibly designed to see how humans would respond to unusual phenomena. Some patterns seemed almost like questions, while others resembled instructions or guidelines. It was clear that the civilization was attempting to communicate, even if the language and methods were not fully understood. The council debated whether to respond immediately or wait for additional patterns. Some members argued that responding quickly could prevent misunderstanding, while others warned that premature responses might introduce ambiguity. After long discussion, they agreed to continue observing, collecting more data, and preparing a carefully worded response once the patterns became clearer. The goal was not to rush, but to act deliberately and thoughtfully. In the research centers, scientists worked in shifts, analyzing every subtle change in the bursts, movements of the vessels, and signals received. They shared findings with the council in real time. It became clear that the civilization was highly intelligent, cautious, and highly capable of interpreting even subtle cues. Analysts realized that any exaggeration, error, or assumption on Earth's part could be magnified. In the observer's perception, every action, no matter how small, mattered. Amid this tense atmosphere, the young technician who had first noticed the atmospheric patterns reflected on the situation. Humanity had always looked to the stars with curiosity and wonder, but now, for the first time, the stars were returning the attention. It was both exciting and terrifying. The responsibility was immense, and the outcome was uncertain. The technician realized that history was being written in real time, and humans had the chance to choose their path with wisdom, patience, and honesty. Days passed, and the observation vessels continued their methodical analysis. Each new signal provided additional clarity, and the council gradually began to understand the civilization's perspective. It became clear that the civilization was neither hostile nor benevolent. They were cautious, experienced, and wary of potential threats. The messages humanity sent and the way humans acted could determine whether future interaction would be peaceful, cooperative, or tense. Finally, after careful observation, a new signal arrived. It was clearer than before, almost like a statement rather than a test. It contained words and symbols that seemed to confirm that the civilization was verifying Earth's claims. Analysts interpreted it as an acknowledgement that Earth had responded. Honestly and clearly, the council felt cautious relief. This was progress, but the situation was far from resolved. The vessels remained, the bursts of energy continued, and the civilization's attention was still focused on the planet. The senior scientist reminded everyone that this was only the beginning. Humans had successfully communicated peace, but the next steps were equally important. Continuous honesty, transparency, and careful observation would be necessary to maintain trust. Any misstep could undo progress, and patience would remain the key to success. The council agreed to maintain constant monitoring, to review all signals, and to prepare additional clarifications if necessary. They emphasized that the goal was not to impress, but to be understood. In this new chapter of human history, understanding and clarity were the most powerful tools. As night fell over Earth, the observation vessels continued their silent orbit. The energy bursts continued to create subtle patterns, now less urgent but more intricate. Scientists watched in awe as the signals interacted with Earth's atmosphere in ways that seemed almost purposeful, almost like a dialogue without words. Humanity had taken the first steps in reaching out to an intelligent civilization, and for the first time, the stars were responding. The council left the chamber, exhausted but hopeful. Every decision, every message, and every observation had brought humanity closer to understanding, and yet the path ahead was still uncertain. The senior scientist reflected on the journey so far, realizing that the key to the future was not techno. The days that followed were unlike anything humanity had experienced before. The observation vessels continued their slow, careful journey around Earth, silently scanning, measuring, and analyzing every signal the planet sent into space. The energy bursts that had once seemed urgent and threatening now appeared methodical, precise, and even almost curious. Scientists at monitoring stations across the world noticed patterns emerging, subtle changes that suggested the civilization above was beginning to verify Earth's message. Inside the council chamber, tension still ran high, but there was a quiet sense of cautious optimism. The senior scientist reminded the members that they were being watched by beings far more advanced and cautious than humans. This meant that every move, every word, and every calculation mattered more than ever. Even the smallest error could lead to misunderstanding, but careful, honest actions could establish trust. The council agreed to maintain a careful watch, monitoring the vessels and the signals continuously while keeping the public unaware. One of the analysts, working late into the night, noticed something remarkable. The energy bursts were now forming, softer, more intricate patterns over certain regions. It was almost as if the vessels were studying how humans responded to unusual phenomena. Some scientists described the patterns as questions, like tests of observation and patience. Others thought they might be instructions, a guide for humans to show that clarity and honesty were the best ways forward. The realization filled the room with a quiet sense of awe. The vessels were not aggressive. They were studying, analyzing, and trying to communicate, just in ways humans had not yet learned to understand. The council debated the next steps. Some members suggested sending a second message to clarify Earth's intentions further, emphasizing transparency and peace. Others worried that any new message could introduce confusion or be misinterpreted as an exaggeration or an attempt at manipulation. After careful consideration, they decided that any additional communication would be factual, precise, and neutral, avoiding emotional language or speculation. This was not about impressing the observers. It was about being understood. Meanwhile, the observation vessels moved even closer to Earth's orbit, their silent presence imposing and awe-inspiring. Their surfaces reflected sunlight in a faint, almost ghostly glow. Although there were no signs of weapons or hostility, the scale of the vessels reminded humans how small their planet was in comparison. Scientists studied every movement, every rotation, and every subtle energy emission. Every pass of the vessels provided new data, and analysts worked tirelessly to understand what each pattern might mean. Inside the control centers, the young technician who had first noticed the atmospheric patterns reflected on the situation. Humanity had always looked at the stars with wonder, but now, for the first time, the stars were returning attention. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. The responsibility weighed heavily. Humans were being judged not by aggression or dominance, but by honesty, patience, and clarity. The technician realized that history was unfolding in real time, and that every decision would shape the planet's future for generations. Days passed with careful observation, and the council began to see a shift. The energy bursts and patterns seemed less urgent and more deliberate, almost like the civilization was reassessing its initial fears. Analysts suggested that the vessels were slowly verifying the accuracy of Earth's first message, confirming that humanity had no hostile intentions. The senior scientist explained that this shift was critical. It meant that progress was being made. Humanity's careful honesty and patience were being recognized, even if the methods of communication were still unusual and indirect. Then, another development occurred. One of the observation vessels projected a wave of energy toward Earth's atmosphere. It was subtle, almost invisible to the naked eye, but instruments detected it immediately. The wave interacted with Earth's magnetic field, creating faint auroras in specific regions. Scientists debated its meaning. Some thought it was a test, a way of verifying Earth's response to unusual phenomena. Others believed it was a form of acknowledgement, a silent way of saying that the observers had received and understood the first message. The council remained cautious. Understanding that interpretation was still a delicate matter. In the following hours, a clearer signal arrived. Analysts worked tirelessly to decode it, and slowly a message emerged. It seemed to confirm that the civilization was reviewing Earth's claims and verifying that the planet's technology and intentions were as stated. The council felt cautious. Relief. This was progress. Humanity had successfully communicated its peaceful intentions, and now the observers were beginning to recognize that honesty. The vessels remained, and the bursts continued, but there was a noticeable shift in tone from caution to measured observation. The council agreed that more clarification was needed to strengthen the trust being built. A third message was drafted. This time, it explained in detail the nature of human technological capabilities, emphasizing limits and the peaceful purposes behind launches, satellites, and energy experiments. The message avoided emotional language and focused on facts. Transparency was emphasized, showing the civilization that humans had nothing to hide. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence scrutinized for potential misinterpretation. While this message was being prepared, the observation vessels began to move, more slowly, circling key regions of the planet. Scientists noticed that the vessels' energy patterns seemed to respond to human activity, almost like they were testing patience, observation, and understanding. The vessels were precise, deliberate, and calm, and scientists realized that they were engaged in a methodical evaluation rather than an attack. The realization brought a quiet sense of awe. Humans were not being threatened. They were being observed, tested, and in a sense, welcomed into a broader understanding. In the council chamber, members reflected on the enormity of the situation. For the first time, humans were interacting with a civilization far more advanced and cautious than themselves. The stakes were immense, not because of conflict, but because of responsibility. Every action mattered. Every message mattered. Every decision had the potential to build trust or introduce misunderstanding. The senior scientist reminded everyone that patience, honesty, and clarity were humanity's strongest tools. By the time the third message was sent, a shift was apparent in the signals. Energy bursts became more precise, less urgent, and even almost deliberate in ways that suggested observation rather than fear. Scientists described the signals as patterns of verification designed to confirm that Earth's statements were accurate. Analysts began comparing the new patterns to previous ones, noticing a gradual reduction in intensity, a sign that the civilization's initial caution was slowly easing. At the same time, a sense of quiet awe spread through the council and the research centers. Humanity had taken its first steps in communicating with an intelligent civilization beyond the stars. The process was slow, careful, and indirect, but the progress was undeniable. Humans were being recognized for honesty, transparency, and patience rather than aggression or fear. It was a monumental achievement, even if the full meaning was not yet understood. The senior scientist reminded everyone that the work was not over. Trust needed to be maintained, communication needed to remain clear, and patience was still essential. Missteps could undo weeks of careful effort. The council agreed to continue monitoring signals, energy bursts, and vessel movements closely, maintaining transparency in actions while remaining cautious. Days turned into weeks, and the observation vessels continued their silent orbit. Every pass provided new patterns, new tests, and new data. Scientists began to understand the subtle language of the energy bursts, seeing them as a form of dialogue, even if it was unlike anything humans had ever experienced. The vessels were not threatening. They were instructing, observing, and verifying. Humanity was learning to communicate across a gap of understanding that stretched across light years. Finally, after careful observation and analysis, a new signal arrived. This one was clearer, containing direct recognition that Earth's statements had been understood. The analysts interpreted as confirmation that the civilization no longer viewed Earth as an immediate threat. The Council felt cautious relief. The vessels remained in orbit, but the tension had eased. Humanity's honesty and patience were being recognized, and a foundation of understanding was being built. The senior scientist addressed the Council one last time that day. "We have successfully communicated our intentions," she said. "The vessels are still observing, but there is no immediate danger. We have shown patience, honesty, and clarity, and that has been recognized. This is the first step in a careful, ongoing relationship. The universe is watching, and we have made this right first impression." The Council members felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had faced the unknown, acted with care, and taken steps to establish communication with an intelligent civilization beyond Earth. The responsibility was still enormous, but the first signs of understanding had arrived. Outside, the vessels moved silently. The energy bursts continued, and humanity watched with cautious optimism. For the first time, the world understood that the stars were not just this. The days following the last message were tense, but a new sense of calm began to settle over the Council chambers and research centers. The observation vessels remained in orbit, silent and massive, but the energy bursts had taken on a softer, more deliberate rhythm. Analysts noticed patterns that suggested curiosity, verification, and a willingness to understand, rather than fear or aggression. For the first time, there was a feeling that the alien civilization might be open to communication in a meaningful way. Inside the Council chambers, the members reflected on the journey so far. Humanity had been watched, analyzed, and tested by a civilization far beyond its comprehension. The stakes had been immense, not because of immediate danger, but because of the responsibility of being honest, patient, and clear. Every decision, every message, every action had shaped the way Earth was perceived. Now, for the first time, it seemed that this careful approach was working. The senior scientist reminded the Council that the situation was not over. Observation was still ongoing, and the vessels were still gathering data. But the tone had shifted. The civilization's initial caution had softened into careful interest. They were verifying the facts, testing the consistency of Earth's responses, and gradually recognizing that humans had no hostile intentions. This was a milestone, a first success in an unprecedented interstellar interaction. Analysts noticed that the energy bursts were forming patterns that corresponded to Earth's geographical regions. Some regions experienced subtle auroras, while others experienced changes in electromagnetic readings. It became clear that the vessels were mapping the planet and its activity with extreme precision. The scientists realized that this was not random scanning, it was deliberate observation, likely aimed at understanding human behavior, technology, and communication methods. The Council debated whether to send another message or to wait for more signals. Some members argued that sending a message now could strengthen trust, while others cautioned that patience was more important. After long discussion, they agreed to continue observing, collecting data, and preparing a carefully worded message if necessary. The focus was on demonstrating consistency, transparency, and honesty, qualities that had already earned them cautious recognition. Meanwhile, the young technician who had first noticed the atmospheric patterns reflected on how far humanity had come in such a short time. Humans had been watched by an advanced civilization and had responded not with fear or aggression, but with careful, honest communication. This realization filled the control rooms with a quiet sense of pride. Humanity had taken its first real steps into a broader universe, proving that patience, honesty, and clarity could bridge incomprehensible distances. Days passed, and the observation vessels continued their precise orbits. Each pass revealed new details about the planet below, and scientists began to understand the subtle patterns of energy bursts as a form of indirect communication. The vessels seemed to respond to human activity, almost as if they were testing patience, observation, and consistency. Analysts noted that even minor fluctuations in human behavior could influence the patterns, underscoring the importance of maintaining calm, honest, and careful responses. One day, a breakthrough occurred. The energy bursts formed a pattern that appeared to correspond to the human messages. Analysts interpreted this as recognition or acknowledgement. It was not verbal, not in any language humans could understand directly, but the structure and repetition suggested that the civilization had received and processed Earth's messages. The Council felt cautious relief. The first step toward interstellar understanding had been achieved. The senior scientist reminded everyone that recognition did not mean full understanding or trust. It was a beginning, not an end. The vessels were still observing. The bursts of energy were still active, and the civilization's attention was still focused on Earth. But for the first time, there was hope that humanity had laid the groundwork for meaningful communication. The Council agreed to prepare a final clarification message, summarizing Earth's intentions, technological capabilities, and commitment to peaceful interaction. This message would not be rushed or emotional. It would be clear, factual, and consistent with previous communications. The goal was to reinforce trust and demonstrate reliability over time. As the message was drafted, the observation vessels displayed another intriguing behavior. Their energy bursts formed intricate, symmetrical patterns across the planet's upper atmosphere, creating faint auroras and electromagnetic signatures. Scientists speculated that this could be a test of consistency or observation, verifying that Earth's responses and communications were steady and truthful. Every member of the Council understood that humanity was being evaluated not by fear, aggression, or skill, but by honesty, clarity, and patience. When the final message was transmitted, the world held its breath, though most of humanity remained unaware of the events unfolding above. The satellites relayed the message into deep space, reaching the observation vessels and the civilization beyond. Analysts monitored every change in the energy bursts, every subtle adjustment in orbital patterns, and every variation in signals. Slowly, the data suggested that the message had been received and understood. The vessel's movements became even, more methodical, almost deliberate, as if confirming comprehension. The senior scientist addressed the Council one last time. "We have done everything we can to communicate honestly and clearly. The vessels have recognized our intent. The signals indicate understanding, and the patterns suggest that our transparency has been acknowledged. This is a historic achievement. First time humans have been observed, evaluated, and understood by an intelligent civilization beyond our solar system." The Council members felt a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. Humanity had succeeded in an unprecedented challenge, not by force or cleverness, but by honesty, patience, and careful communication. They had faced the unknown with responsibility, and their actions had been recognized in a form that transcended language and distance. Outside the chambers, life continued as usual for the majority of humans. The sky remained the same to most eyes, but in the laboratories and observation centers, humanity's place in the broader universe had shifted forever. The realization was profound. Earth had been observed, tested, and now acknowledged for its honesty and consistency. The stakes had been high, but the lessons learned were even higher. The senior scientist reflected on the journey. Humanity had been mistaken for a potential threat, misunderstood because of its rapid technological growth and activity. Yet, through calm, factual communication and careful observation, humans had demonstrated their peaceful intent. The result was an unprecedented recognition by a civilization far beyond their understanding. This was not just a victory for the Council or the scientists, it was a milestone for all of humanity. The observation vessels, now in stable orbit, continued their slow, silent presence. Their energy bursts formed patterns that were no longer urgent or testing, but measured and deliberate, almost like a signal of ongoing observation with patience rather than fear. The scientists interpreted this as a sign of continued interest and acknowledgement. Humanity had passed its first real test in interstellar diplomacy without even using words. Weapons or force-only honesty, clarity, and patience. The young technician looked up at the sky one evening, reflecting on how far humanity had come in such a short time. For generations, humans had dreamed of intelligent life beyond their world, and now, for the first time, they had been seen, understood, and respected. The vessels above were silent observers, yet they had acknowledged Earth's message, creating a bridge of understanding that might one day lead to real communication. In the council chambers, the final decision was made to continue monitoring the vessels, to maintain transparency, and to prepare for future interaction carefully. The lessons were clear. Trust is earned, patience is essential, and honesty is the strongest tool in situations of misunderstanding. Humanity had taken its first steps in a broader universe, and every action moving forward would be built on this foundation. The senior scientist concluded with words that echoed through the chamber. We have faced the unknown, and we have shown that humanity can meet it not with fear, not with aggression, but with honesty and understanding. The universe has noticed us, and we have begun the work of being understood. The rest is a journey we must continue with care, responsibility, and patience. As night fell over Earth, the observation vessels moved silently in their orbits. There, energy bursts formed faint, deliberate patterns, a reminder that humanity had been watched, evaluated, and acknowledged. The world below slept unaware, while above, the universe quietly recognized a small planet that had chosen honesty over fear, clarity over chaos, and patience over rash action. For the first time, humans understood that the stars were more than distant points of light. They were alive with intelligence, curiosity, and observation. Humanity had been tested and had succeeded, not with weapons or strategy, but with truth, patience, and transparency. And as the night sky stretched endlessly above, the council, the scientists, and the young technicians understood one profound truth. The universe was vast, mysterious, and alive, and humanity had just taken its first step toward understanding.